For those who were not here last week, I have decided to preach a series of homilies basically covering pretty much the entirety of what we believe as Christians, sort of catechism classes, but saved for the Mass. So essentially I'm breaking up my adult education classes that I teach in order to prepare people for receiving the sacraments at Easter into basically what are 15 to 20 minute chunks, pieces that will take a couple of years to get through. So I began last week by talking about the existence of God, and today I'm going to take that one step further and talk about the Trinity. Now, I've more or less given this exact same homily before on Trinity Sunday, and for a bit this week I thought maybe I would just, refer you to that homily and move on to the next topic. But I wanted to have all these homilies in one place, on one playlist on my YouTube channel. Plus, I have a couple of things that I have added to my Trinity talk since Trinity Sunday. But bear with me if you've heard most of this before. St. Thomas Aquinas said, "Repetitio mater studiorum," which means repetition is the mother of study. So it does good for us to hear things a couple of times anyways. The Trinity is the most basic teaching of Christianity. There is one God, and that one God exists in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And this is a really important teaching for us. It is the most basic teaching for us because everything else we believe comes back to this one teaching, that we believe God to be a Trinity. All of creation is based off of this understanding of God. God modeled all creation on himself. As Catholics, we are called upon to view the entire universe around us from a Trinitarian perspective. We were created by God, who is love, and we were made to share in that love, to be a part of that love. St. Augustine, the great 5th century theologian and bishop, he said, "Our hearts are restless until they rest in God." And what he meant by that is that at every moment of our lives, God is calling to us. God is drawing near to us, asking us to seek him, to know him, and to love him. And he does this in a number of ways, through creation itself, through the church, through the saints, through the sacraments, through the people in our lives. God is constantly revealing himself to us. God is so much more than some guy sitting in heaven. To me, it would be rather boring if the heavens just parted and God spoke to us in that way, because he speaks to us in a whole rainbow of ways, a whole litany of ways. The Creator is everywhere we look because he's left his mark on his creation. We just have to open our eyes. The only problem with believing in the Trinity is that this idea of God is impossible to grasp. We will never fully comprehend the Trinity and what it means. We will never fully grasp all that there is to know about God. Even in heaven, we'll never know. We will never exhaust all that there is to contemplate and discover about God and his three-personhood. I think there's this mistaken notion that once we get to heaven, if we get to heaven, all will be revealed and we will all know and understand everything perfectly. But I find that very hard to believe. Part of God is the mystery of God. Part of heaven is us always growing and always learning. The beauty of heaven to me is that there will always be something new and something exciting. Why would God spoil it for us by dumping it all on us at once? Some people, however, think that because we can't know everything about the Trinity, it means that we can't know anything about the Trinity, and that simply isn't true. Yes, the Trinity is a mystery. A mystery means that it's something that God had to reveal to us, otherwise we wouldn't know about it. But fortunately, he has revealed some things about himself to us. So we can know things about the Trinity, just not all of it. So what do we know about the Trinity? What has God revealed to us? We can start with the basics. First, we know that there's only one God. That is something he has revealed to us. There are two other major world religions that would agree with us, Christians, in saying that there is only one God. The religions of Judaism and Islam. However, our non Christian, Jewish, and Muslim brothers and sisters would in a way consider us to be pagans because we believe, correctly, that this one God has revealed himself as a communion of three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. To them, though, that's blasphemous. To them, it's essentially saying that there are three gods, which we are not saying. The teaching of the Trinity is the exact thing that Jesus was arrested and crucified for. He taught that there was a Trinity and that he was one of the persons of the Holy Trinity. To Jesus' opponents, this was not possible because God is one, and that's true, God is one. But he reveals himself to be perfectly one while at the same time existing as three persons. Now, how is that possible? What does that even mean? Christians almost always make a mistake when they're trying to explain the Trinity. They almost always say, well, God is three in one. And, I mean, that statement doesn't mean anything. It's nonsensical. God is three in one. What does that mean? There needs to be more explanation. Otherwise, it just sounds like we're making stuff up or that we're bad at math. You know, Trinity isn't a matter of mathematics. We're not saying that 1 + 1 + 1 = 1. That would be nonsensical. What we're saying is that in God, there are three persons who completely possess one nature. And in order to understand what that means, in order to understand who God is, we had better be sure that we know what these words that we use mean. And we better use these words correctly. We can't just say God is three in one. We have to say God is three persons in one nature. And so, once again, I know I've gone through this a number of times, but we have to understand what person and nature actually mean when we're speaking from a theological perspective. And I just did this recently in my January 1st homily on the Feast of Mary, the Mother of God. But as I said then, the church spent the first 400 years of its existence nailing down these two words, basically. So nature and person are quite important when it comes to talking about the divine. So first, nature. What do we mean by nature? In theology, nature answers the question of what. What something is its nature. So rocks have a nature specific to them. So do dogs and cows and trees and fish. And everything that exists has a nature that describes what that thing is. So as human beings, we have a nature that is specific to human beings. What are we? We are human. That is our nature. Which means that it's in our nature to do human things. It's because of our human nature that we have physical bodies, that we have emotions, that we have an intellect, that we have a free will allowing us to choose, that we have souls. Those are all properties of our human nature. So nature then is to be seen not only as what we are, but taking it a bit further, nature can be seen as the source of what we're able to do. Because we are human beings, we can do human things like laugh and cry and walk and talk and think and sleep and love. All because it's part of human nature. Some of us can't do some of these things as well as others, like I'm never going to be able to play basketball like Michael Jordan did. And athletes in that way are more proficient on the physical side of human nature, the more coordination side of human nature. Some people are better at the intellectual side or the spiritual side of human nature. We think of saints, mystics like Padre Pio, who were so connected to God that miraculous things surrounded him all the time. And the reason for this is that no one human being perfectly possesses human nature in its totality. We weren't designed to do that. God made us to only realize what human nature is when we look at the human race as a whole. It's only when we're viewed as one human family that we can see the entire picture of what it means to be human. So that's what nature is. Now let's talk about person, which is a little easier to grasp because it's used in the way that we use it in common parlance. But person answers the question of who. Nature decides what and what a thing can do, but it's not nature that does them, it's the person that does them. I, the person. We can say that it's our nature to be able to do certain things, but it's we that do those things. Human nature allows us to communicate. I'm able to speak to you because I'm a human and I possess human nature, but it is I, the person, Father Weirs, that is doing the speaking. It's not my human nature that's doing the speaking. So this is why it's a weak argument to blame things on human nature. Well, that's just human nature, honey. Sorry. It doesn't work because in almost every case, it is people who make the decisions, not our nature. So it's really important to have this distinction down because now we're going to try to understand a little bit about the Trinity using these two terms, person and nature. And this is where things go beyond our understanding. But that's not to say that we might as well give up trying to understand at least a little. Getting to know God is essential to growing closer to Him. So in the Trinity, you have three persons that are distinct. They are as distinct as you or I are distinct because we're different people. However, we have to be careful because even though the three persons of the Trinity are distinct, it doesn't make them separate from one another. As persons, we are distinct and separate because none of us possesses human nature completely. As persons, we are distinct because even though we possess a share in human nature, we don't possess all of it. And that's what allows for the vast differences between human beings, differences in skill and uniqueness that we see in each member of the human race. None of us are the perfect version of human nature. But that's not how the Trinity works. In the Trinity, each of the three persons completely and totally possesses human nature. They do not share it. This is impossible for us to grasp because in three human beings, you would have three distinct persons, each with their own separate share in human nature. But and in those three human beings, each chooses with a separate will and thinks with a separate intellect. But in the Trinity, the three persons of God are God by the possession of the one single divine nature. You know, sometimes I think of as the Trinity, that each person of the Trinity is God seen through a different lens, sort of a different aspect of God. But even that is dangerous territory because it's not quite correct, because Jesus speaks to the Father, and he speaks of the Holy Spirit. He's not speaking to himself, in his prayer. So because each person is God, each person in the Trinity possesses the divine nature. It means that each of the divine persons can do divine things, just like our human nature allows us to do human things. And so each of the three divine persons can create. Each of them are all-powerful, all-knowing. St. Thomas Aquinas, a great 12th century monk and theologian, he used a word to describe all of the attributes of God at once. He called it aseitas, which basically means that God is the perfection of everything. And it describes the divine nature. So the three persons know equally, and they know totally. They each choose freely because they're persons, and yet they are so perfect that they all choose the same. And that's why when Jesus says, "Whoever sees me sees the Father," he really means it. Whatever you see Jesus doing, the Father also chooses that as well. And the Holy Spirit chooses that as well. When Jesus chooses to die for us on the cross, that is the Father's choice. When Jesus serves the poor, so does the Father. That is his will. When Jesus heals, when he loves, when he casts out demons, when he preaches, that is what the Father and the Holy Spirit choose to do distinctly, yet they choose the same. And that's why it's so difficult for us to understand, because there's nothing else like that in all of the universe. It makes sense because God exists outside of the universe. He wasn't created, he simply is, and all of creation then sort of takes its cue from God. But here's what it means for us. By revealing himself as a Trinity, something amazing happens that could only happen if God were a Trinity. When the Father and the Son, or when the Father sends the Son and the Holy Spirit to us, he has revealed sort of who he is, sort of the inmost secret of God. That his very being, the essence of who he is, of what God is that he is a communion of love. The Catechism teaches us, quote, "God himself is an eternal exchange of love, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and he has destined us to share in that exchange. So this view of God is markedly different than if we were to believe that God were just one person. If God were just one person, well, a one-person God can't give of himself in the same way that a Trinitarian God can, because there's nobody to give himself to. A one-person God is not fruitful because there is nobody to produce fruit with. The only possibility that leaves is that a one-person God is a God who does not love at all, or that he only loves himself, and that isn't really true love. Love that does not go beyond oneself is not love. And perhaps we see this in the beginning and in the Jewish faith and Muslim faith, that God really isn't a God of love, or at least not in the way that we understand him as Christians. People are often concerned with the God of the Old Testament. He seems to be vengeful. He seems to threaten destruction all the time. He takes every opportunity to punish that he can. But then there's this nice God of the New Testament. We see Jesus, and he's caring, and he's compassionate, and he's merciful. Well, what gives? Did God change? No. God doesn't change. The fact is that we changed. We have to understand that the Bible, while inspired and authored ultimately by God, was in fact written by human beings. And human beings learn slowly over time, over centuries, even thousands of years. So what we see in the beginning of the scriptures is a very limited, very sort of primitive understanding of who God is. It's a childlike understanding almost, like, God, if I do good, will you reward me? Thanks. That's kind of their idea. But little by little, our understanding of God develops through the scriptures to the point where by the end of the Bible, the ultimate truth is realized that God is love. And we can say that God is love because by the end of the scriptures, we know that God is a Trinity of love. And because we believe in a Trinity, we human beings make a lot more sense. If God wasn't a constant giving and receiving of love, that eternal exchange of the three persons of the Holy Trinity, if he weren't a community of love that he could share with us, then why would he create us? Why would he bother? If God were just one person and he created us, well, either that would make God rather needy, having to create something to love, or that would make God a little not nice. That would make us his playthings, sort of like the Greek gods meddling in human affairs because they're more or less bored. But because God is love, we now can understand that he made us to be a part of that love, and all creation as a result of that love. Since God is three persons in one nature, love can be given and love can be shared. St. Augustine was quite right when he said, our hearts are restless until they rest in God. And the reason for that is because we were made in the image of the Trinity. We were made to share in that infinite and eternal exchange between Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. We were made to be loved.